There it is. Now everyone can see. And then
Whoa.
voice chat channel will have everything from Twitch. So if anyone's wondering what Twitch is talking about, or the Twitch channel's talking about, that would be the place to go.
Wait, where? I don't know.
Cool.
In
Thanks,
the
Austin.
voice chat channel.
Okay.
Yeah, because we're doing this on Twitch as well. So if
This one
anyone
doesn't look
comments
that
Is there a
long.
link on Twitch? Because I want to
We're
watch
going through
it.
the chapters. Never mind.
I mean, it's a shorter one compared to like, I don't know, because we did like the double portion a couple weeks back, and then we had like, I don't know, some of them have been a lot longer.
Is there a way to watch it on Twitch too? Because I want to watch what they're saying.
Yeah.
Wait, you guys stream it on Twitch?
Yep.
Legit.
Let me type it in.
Can I read?
Do it, you won't?
Can I read 9?
You want to read 9? Leviticus 9?
Yeah. I just want to read one chapter.
Yep, you could definitely do that.
Do it, you won't?
We're gonna start this up here. All right,
I don't
welcome.
even know what I'm reading though.
Everybody, to the weekly live Bible study. I just started streaming it on Twitch like 10 seconds ago, so there's probably no one in here. But in the rare event that they are, we do these every Saturday at 2 p.m. Eastern from Discord. And if you're on Twitch, you can just type Discord literally in any sentence in chat, and you'll get a link to join the conversation. Anyone can chime in with opinions, comments, questions, disagreements, insults to Naz, or make fun of Yellow for not showing up for the last one.
Yeah.
And we will read a portion of scripture. We'll have commentary. We'll have discussions around it. Then we'll move to the next portion. These Bible studies typically last about 2 hours, sometimes longer, sometimes a little bit less. And if you miss anything, these are all recorded, so you can actually go back and rewatch it, except for one portion that we messed up on and it wasn't recorded. That being said, since we're jumping back into Leviticus, we did Leviticus just prior to Passover, and then we switch over to the Passover portions. Now we're back over in Leviticus. Naz, do you want to do a recap of the previous Leviticus portion before going into this, or do you think this is enough?
Sure. Well, we'll kind of have like a brief recap of where we are, because we've had a break. So, okay, so we're in Leviticus, and we've come out of Exodus, and so in Exodus, we've got the establishment of the tabernacle, and we've seen how the tabernacle is a microcosm, a small working scale of all creation, and in different parts of the temple tabernacle represents all of creation, just like how the high priest represents all of creation. And so this is the place where mankind now is going to come to become reconciled with the Most High. And so this is another Eden. This is another restored, renewed creation. And this is how the Most High is going to put the worlds to rights. And so what we see from the crossover from Exodus to Leviticus is that Moses is barred entry into the tabernacle. And this paves the way for the introduction for the various types of offerings that we see in Leviticus. And so this is the way now that you're going to approach the Most High. And so this leads us on to the idea of priesthood, working now within the tabernacle. And so the priesthood, they're going to be representing the new Adam in this restored, renewed creation. And so in today's Torah portion, we're going to be looking at Leviticus chapter 9, 10 and 11. And in chapter 9, we're going to see this inauguration of the priesthood of Aaron and his sons. And basically, this is going to be in parallel to the establishment of Adam, the new Adam in the Garden of Eden. And this is going to follow on to Leviticus chapter 10, where we're going to see a curious account with Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron. And there's going to be a problem that's going to develop, and they're going to die. And we're going to follow the same type of pattern that we see in Genesis chapter 1 to 3, where Adam is set up, he's placed into Eden, everything is fine, but then something happens, sin enters into the picture, and we've got this fall scene, and then things go bad. And so we've got this kind of scene with Nadab and Abihu that comes into the picture after the establishment of an inauguration of the priesthood. And then after that, we get instructions dealing with food. Why have we got this kind of structure? Why does food come in chapter 11? Why is it going to talk about instruction about food? Well, again, there's going to be another parallel to Genesis chapter 3. And so basically, the basic idea is we're going to be reading Leviticus chapter 9, 10, and 11 in light of Genesis chapter 3, and we're going to note any parallels. But that's a brief introduction.
Sweet. Okay, any comments, questions, or insults before we begin? And then Dean will read off Leviticus 9. All right, Dean, take it away.
Okay, Shemini. On the 8th day, Moses called Aaron and his sons and the elders of Israel. He said to Aaron, "Take a calf of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering without blemish, and bring them before the Lord. And speak to the Israelites, saying, Take a he-goat for a sin offering, a calf and a lamb, yearlings without blemish, for a burnt offering, an ox and a ram for an offering for well-being to sacrifice before the Lord, and a meal offering with oil mixed in, for today the Lord will appear to you." They brought to the front of the tent of meeting the things that Moses had commanded, and the whole community came forward and stood before the Lord. Moses said, "This is what the Lord has commanded that you do, that the presence of the Lord may appear to you." Then Moses said to Aaron, "Come forward to the altar and sacrifice your sin offering and your burnt offering. Make expiation for yourself and for the people, and sacrifice the people's offerings in expiation for them, as the Lord has commanded." Aaron Aaron came forward to the altar and slaughtered his calf and of sin offering. Aaron's sons brought the blood to him. He dipped his finger in the blood and put it on the horns of the altar, and he poured out the rest of the blood at the base of the altar. The fat, the kidneys, and the protuberance of the liver from the sin offering he turned into smoke on the altar, as the Lord had commanded Moses. And the flesh and the skin were consumed in fire outside the camp. Then he slaughtered the burnt offering. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, and he dashed it against all sides of the altar. They passed the burnt offering to him in sections, as well as the head, and he turned it into smoke on the altar. He washed the entrails and the legs and turned them into smoke on the altar with the burnt offering. Next he brought forward the people's offerings. He took the goat for the people's sins offering and slaughtered it and presented it as a sin offering like the previous one. He brought forward the burnt offering and sacrificed it according to regulation. He then brought forward the meal offering, and taking a handful of it, he turned it into smoke on the altar, in addition to the burnt offering of the morning. In addition to the burnt offering of the morning, he slaughtered the ox and the ram, the people's offerings of well-being. Aaron's sons passed the blood to him, which he dashed against every side of the altar, and the fat and the part of the ox and the ram, the broad tail, the fat covering, the kidneys, and the protuberance of the livers. They laid these fat parts over the breasts, and Aaron turned the fat parts into smoke on the altar, and elevated the breasts and the right thighs as an elevation offering before the Lord, as Moses had commanded. Aaron lifted his hands toward the people and blessed them, and he stepped down after offering the sin offering, the burnt offering, and the offering of well-being. Moses and Aaron then went inside the tent of meeting. When they came out, they blessed the people, and the presence of the Lord appeared to all the people. Fire came forth from before the Lord and consumed the burnt offering and the fat parts on the altar. And all the people saw and shouted and fell on their faces.
All right. Comments, questions, anything from anyone who wants to comment on this?
Okay, that just sounds gross, though. Like, I know it's like a religious thing, but like just taking someone's like the animal's fat and like the blood and like smearing it, like it's so gross. Like, are you kidding me? Do you think that people actually would just cut up an animal and like do that? Just whack to me.
Well, I mean, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, we're dealing with like an agricultural society, so that they wouldn't be so squeamish when it comes to slaughtering animals for food and things like this, and so you got to realize that also this is also for speaking more generally. The types of offerings are also for the priesthood to eat and live, right? Because the Levites don't get an inheritance. And so some of these offerings constitute some of their actual inheritance to live, because they're not apportioned a tribal land. And so it'd be very difficult for them to kind of live and obtain food without kind of the offerings. So they get access to the various types of like grain and meat offerings and things like this. And so what's also good to take into account is that the animals, generally speaking, were not permitted to suffer when they died. If you look at, like, for instance, Orthodox Jewish understanding when it comes to slaughtering an animal, the animal is not permitted to suffer, and if it does suffer, then it renders the animal unkosher to eat. So, it's a very different society rather than more of a kind of a Western 21st century kind of society where you're not very well versed in like slaughtering animals and things like this. So there is that.
Interesting.
The blood has something to represent, though, too. It's just not just we're smearing blood all over the altar and other places.
Yeah, I mean, this is the way now that you approach the Most High. You got the barring of entry of Moses in the last chapter of Exodus, and this paves the way for the introduction for the various types of offerings that are going to be offered up. And so on that side as well, it's also an act of faith to make these types of offerings as well, because obviously, again, you're dealing with an agricultural society, and you're giving over some of your animals that you could be using to eat or to live by. And so the assumption is that the Most High is going to provide those animals again so your family can eat and things like this. And so, these are very real acts, what they're doing, and they're also demonstrating faith when they do that the Most High is still going to provide for them, even though they're offering these animals up. So we can also look at the kind of like intention behind the offerings as well, and associate it that way.
So there's another interesting similarity here, where in Leviticus we have a fire came out from before the Lord, consumed the burnt offering, the pieces, and the people saw it. They shouted and fell on their faces. We have that similar thing with Solomon's temple, when Solomon builds the temple and finishes his prayer, and then you have a fire coming down from heaven, consuming the burnt offering and sacrifices in I think 2 Chronicles. And then the people all bow down, faces to the ground, and worship, giving thanks to the Lord.
Yeah, I mean, we got another. Basically, it's kind of a mirror type of image that you see from one to another. And so even within Solomon's temple, you've got like additional imagery, like of the cherubim and things like this. So again, it's another Eden that's being reestablished. It's another restored, renewed creation. And so the priests priesthood here, Aaron and his sons are being inaugurated, and so they're being set up as a new Adam. And there's a couple of Jewish sources which link the high priest to Adam. So, like for instance, the Hebrew of Ben Sirach links Adam to a high priest, and also Midrash Rabbah Numbers links Aaron, the high priest, to Adam. And so you got this kind of connection there, where now that Aaron and the priesthood are going to be representing Adam, and you're going to see this as you go into the next chapter, because like the high priest is anointed, he's an anointed one, he's a Mashiach, and so what you'll see is he's not permitted to leave during the time of the inauguration and things like this, when he's got the oil of anointing on him. And so basically, what picture does the temple represent, or the tabernacle represent? It's that restored, renewed creation. And so within that, the high priest is going to be functioning as that new Adam. And also in this chapter, you see that the high priest, he raises his hands and he blesses the people. So this is a very priestly act. So when you read like the Gospel of Luke, at the very end, when the Messiah is just about to ascend, what you'll notice is that he raises his hands and he blesses the disciples, and then he ascends up on a cloud. And so this ascending up on the cloud is very reminiscent of what the imagery that you see of Daniel chapter 7, where the Son of Man comes on the cloud and he goes to the Ancient of Days. And what some scholarship have noted is that the imagery there is very reminiscent of high priestly imagery. When the high priest goes into the Holy of Holies, he's accompanied by a cloud. And so the Son of Man has this cloud imagery that associates him when he goes to the Ancient of Days. And so what some of the scholarship says, well, this is obviously built off of the imagery of the Day of Atonement. And so in the Gospel of Luke, at the very end, when the Messiah just is about to ascend, he raises his hands like what you're seeing in this very chapter. He blesses his disciples. He then ascends up, because the temple would have been understood as kind of like the highest point. You'll get texts like Isaiah chapter 2, where the house is placed on the highest mountains. And so again, you've got this kind of cosmic geography, where it's kind of centrality of the temple. It's the center of all creation, so to speak. And so then the Messiah in Luke ascends up and he returns to the Most High. And so you've got this kind of high priestly backdrop now, imagery of him raising his hands, blessing the disciples, ascending up as you would ascending up to the temple, and then coming to the Most High accompanied by a cloud. And that would be very reminiscent of the Day of Atonement type of imagery.
Yeah. There's also in just a comparison with Leviticus 9, talking about like Moses, Aaron going into the tent of meeting, and they came out. And then in Hebrews, we also see Hebrews 9:24 through 28, which also alludes to that same kind of imagery, and kind of confirms that the general consensus then was that the tabernacle is a copy of everything else, and that is saying, for Christ has entered not into holy places made with hands, which are copies of the true things, but actually into heaven itself, now to appear in the presence of God on our behalf. Or nor was it to offer himself repeatedly as the high priest enters the holy place every year with the blood, not his own, for then he would have had to suffer repeatedly since the foundation of the world. So it's just kind of like that same, this is a representation of everything. And that's how they saw it. At least the writer of Hebrews here did.
You could also say, using Moses and Aaron, that imagery kind of goes back to when they were kicked out of Garden of Eden. Moses and Aaron were kicked out, and then Adam and Eve kicked out. Same way, two people.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other comments, questions, observations about anything in Leviticus 9 before moving into Leviticus 10? Okay. Leviticus 10. Aaron's sons Nadab and Abihu took their censers, put fire in them, and added incense, and they offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, contrary to his command. So fire came out from the presence of the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. Moses then said to Aaron, "This is what the Lord spoke of when he said, 'Among those who approach me, I will be proved holy. In the sight of all people, I will be honored.'" Aaron remained silent. Moses summoned Mishael and Elzaphan, sons of Aaron's uncle Uziel, and said to them, "Come here, carry your cousins outside the camp, away from the front of the sanctuary." So they came and carried them, still in their tunics, outside the camp, as Moses ordered. Then Moses said to Aaron and his son Eleazar and Ithamar, "Do not let your hair become unkept, and do not tear your clothes, or you will die, and the Lord will be angry with the whole community. But your relatives, all the Israelites, may mourn for those the Lord has destroyed by fire. Do not leave the entrance to the tent of meeting, or you will die, because the Lord's anointing oil is on you." So they did as Moses said. Then the Lord said to Aaron, "You and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of meeting, or you will die. This is a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, so that you can distinguish between the holy and the common, between the unclean and the clean, so that you can teach the Israelites all the decrees the Lord has given them through Moses." Moses said to Aaron and his remaining sons, Eleazar and Ithamar, "Take the grain offering left over from the food offerings prepared without yeast and presented to the Lord, and eat it beside the altar, for it is most holy. Eat it in the sanctuary area, because it is your share and your son's share of the food offering presented to the Lord, for so I have been commanded. But you and your sons and your daughters may eat the breast that was waved and the thigh that was presented. Eat them in a ceremonial clean place. They have been given to you and your children as a share of the Israelites' fellowship offering. The thigh that was presented and the breast that was waved must be brought with the fat portions of the food offering, to be waved before the Lord as a wave offering. This will be the perpetual share for you and your children, as the Lord has commanded." When Moses inquired about the goat of the sin offering and found that it had been burned up, he was angry with Eleazar and Ithamar, Aaron's remaining sons, and asked, "Why didn't you eat the sin offering in the sanctuary area? It is most holy. It was given to you to take away the guilt of the community by making atonement for them before the Lord. Since its blood was not taken up into the holy place, you should have eaten the goat in the sanctuary area as I commanded." Aaron replied to Moses, "Today they sacrificed their sin offering and their burnt offering before the Lord, but such things as this have happened to me. Would the Lord have been pleased if I had eaten the sin offering today?" When Moses heard this, he was satisfied. All right, there's a lot there. Going to open up for the comments and questions. I have to go deal with something that just happened in the house, so I'll be right back. But yeah, comments, questions, insults, and then if I'm not back in time, if Dean, if you can pick up on Leviticus 11, I should be back. But yeah.
So there we go. We get the account of Nadab and Abihu bringing strange fire before the Most High. And so we've got like two figures, Nadab and Abihu. And so this may be a possible allusion to two figures, Adam and Eve. And what some scholarship say about this account is that there's allusions to the story that we see with Genesis chapter 3. So there's some parallels between the two accounts. We get the idea of death type of imagery. That Nadab and Abihu, they die, and we get this idea of, in the day that you shall eat, you shall of the tree, you shall die. When it comes to Genesis chapter 3, both accounts contain the idea of taking and giving. Both breach what has been commanded. We both see a bodily removal from the account in Leviticus chapter 10. The bodies of Nadab and Abihu are removed from the sacred presence. Adam and Eve are also exiled from sacred presence. we get the Hebrew word for tunic employed in both accounts. Nadab and Abihu are carried out via their tunics, and that Hebrew word is actually the very same Hebrew word that Adam and Eve are clothed with. And so there seems to be little indicators within the Hebrew of allusions to the story of Adam and Eve. And so, this would make sense if you think about it. You've got the inauguration in the previous chapter of setting up a new Adam. And just like in Genesis 2-3, where you get Adam being set up in the Garden of Eden, then you get this full scene where kind of sin enters into the picture and things go bad and the picture gets messed up. And so it seems to be, again, kind of reflecting the kind of material that you're seeing in Genesis 1-3. And there's going to be additional links back to Genesis chapter 3 as we move on. Especially also in the next chapter when it comes to the food instructions, because there's going to be a couple of Hebrew words or three Hebrew words used in tandem with each other that are very, very rare, that you only find in a very few places. And so when it comes to the idea of mourning, if you notice, Aaron and his sons were not to mourn, but that mourning was given over to their brothers. And so why are they not allowed to mourn in the holy place? What's the idea behind that? Well, if you track this back to Adam, the priesthood are going to represent the new Adam. They're meant to not mar the picture. They're meant to keep the picture alive, because in Genesis chapter 2, you've got how the Most High interacts with mankind. And in that situation, death isn't a thing yet, because we're not in Genesis chapter 3. And so there is no need for mourning or pain or suffering or things like this. And Aaron and his sons are told not to mourn. And so basically, don't mar the picture of this renewed, restored creation. And if you think about texts like Revelation, so I'm going to read out this, and notice how it connects the idea of mourning, no longer mourning or weeping, with the idea of new creation. So we get this, and I heard a voice out of heaven saying, "Behold, the tabernacle of God with men, and he will tabernacle with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no longer, nor mourning, nor outcry, nor will there be pain anymore, for the first things are passed away." So there you got the idea of the tabernacle, and it's being associated with the Most High dwelling with people, and there's going to be no mourning and things like this. And so basically now it's in a high priestly context, where you got this idea of no mourning. Within Revelation chapter 22, you get all of the elements together. In Revelation 22, you get the idea of New Jerusalem. It's got Eden imagery. It's got the Tree of Life imagery. The people who go into the New Jerusalem, they have the divine name on their foreheads. And again, that's high priestly imagery, because as we see in Exodus chapter 28, the high priest is to bear the divine name on his forehead. So we've got all of these priestly elements within Revelation. And we've got this kind of mourning aspect, that there will no longer be any mourning or tears or pain or suffering. And so basically what we see there in Leviticus chapter 10 is that Aaron is told not to mourn for his sons, even though they've been killed. And again, it's the idea of not marring the picture. Don't break the picture, because this is how the Most High is going to restore all of creation, and mourning and tears and pain and stuff like that should not be focused on. So anyway, those are my comments.
What's meant by strange fire? Do you guys know?
Strange fire, it's very difficult to kind of say what that could be. I mean, you do have the idea of sacred flames. You'll have like so when the flames of the tabernacle were conceptualized, they were understood to be sacred, so they weren't profane. And so they seem to be bringing in some kind of profane flame, maybe they didn't originate it from within the tabernacle itself, or maybe they brought it outside. The text doesn't really say it, so it's really, really difficult to nail down exactly what this is. And you're going to have various different opinions about, what this could be. Well, I don't know if anyone else has got any comments on this.
So
I'm sure this is prefiguring something else in the Bible that we just haven't seen yet.
So I was looking at numerous commentaries on this strange flame idea and what it could possibly mean. There are dozens of different interpretations by rabbis and scholars. Some of them go as far as to say that like the Lord consuming them with fire was similar to them just ascending to heaven, like because they were righteous, and then makes little note about the strange fire being an issue. Others say that it was like this was just another odd thing, like they started the fire weird, but since it's immediately after saying that no one should be entering into that area with wine or like any kind of alcohol, given the assumption that the two sons actually went in drunk or they had been drinking when they went in there, which is why immediately after it talks about what is it, I'm trying to find it real quick. And I don't see it. Oh, you and your sons are not to drink wine or other fermented drink whenever you go into the tent of meeting, or you will die. And that's right afterwards, talking about like another command. So possibly this is just the tip of the iceberg kind of a thing, or the last straw that broke the camel's back, and that is why. But there's dozens of commentaries as to what this could possibly mean. And if they were in the wrong for something, or if they were just like bad from the beginning, or if it's something that evolved, or if they were just completely righteous and this was them being consumed in this like weird and strange fire.
Interesting.
Any other comments, questions? Leviticus 11 has a lot of interesting stuff.
I do have a comment. It's kind of like, I've just thought of it basically, so I'm still thinking it through. So in texts like Isaiah chapter 6, you get the idea of serifs. And so serifs are before the throne of the Most High, and Isaiah sees a seraph. So a seraph is kind of like a flaming serpent. And within the text of Isaiah also, it has this additional imagery of a flying, fiery serpent. And so these serpents are kind of flying and fiery. And when you think about the text of Genesis chapter 3, you meet the Nakash, the serpent. And the judgment against the serpent was that it would go on its belly. So you can infer maybe a couple of things from that. It either had legs or it had wings. And that's the judgment that it had. It loses its wings or its feet, and then it crawls on its belly. Now, if we've got these texts in Isaiah that talk about these fiery flying serpents, and it links the idea of a seraph to the very throne of the Most High, could it be possible that the serpent that you're reading about in Genesis chapter 3 is actually one of these fiery flying serifs? And so if you track that to Nadab and Abihu, they're bringing in this kind of fire before the Most High, this strange kind of fire. So could this be also an allusion to the serpent, in the sense of it being a fiery flying serpent, and they're bringing it in before the Most High? It's just a possibility that I thought of. But anyway, it may need further research on that one.
Like that one.
So would you say there could be a potential connection between the Serifs before the throne of God and high priest before the tabernacle?
Yes.
What I'm saying is that when you look at the imagery before the throne of the Most High, you get two sets of imagery. Number one is the cherubim, and number two is the Serifs. So you get serpent imagery and you get cherubim imagery, and they're different and distinct from each other. And so this seems to constitute the temple imagery. And so it makes sense to me that when you're reading Genesis 3, because you've already got the imagery of the cherubim there in Genesis chapter 3, that the seraph imagery probably wouldn't be far behind. And in fact, we do see snake imagery, serpent imagery in Genesis chapter 3. So I think that what potentially is happening is that it's giving you both sets of imagery in Genesis 3. So you've got the cherubs and you've got the seraphs as well. So again, it's pointing you back to temple imagery. And so I think that potentially when you're dealing with flames in the context of coming before the Most High, you're also dealing with this kind of seraph type of imagery that you see in Isaiah, for instance. When Isaiah sees a vision of the Most High, he sees the fiery seraphs, the fiery serpents that are before the throne of the Most High. So I think that we could be dealing with temple imagery here, but that's just my kind of off-the-cuff comments.
Okay, and I don't think I have anything else for Leviticus 10. I guess we'll move into Leviticus 11, which there's a lot of imagery here with Genesis. Okay, Leviticus 11. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Say to the Israelites, of all the animals that live on the land, these are the ones you may eat. You may eat any animal that has divided the hoof and that chews the cud. There are some that only chew the cud or only have a divided hoof, but you must not eat them. The camel, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is ceremonially unclean for you. The hydrax, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. The rabbit, though it chews the cud, does not have a divided hoof. It is unclean for you. And the pig, though it has a divided hoof, does not chew the cud. It is unclean for you. You must not eat their meat or touch their carcasses. They are unclean for you. Of all the living creatures in the water of the seas and the streams, you may eat any that have fins and scales. But all the creatures in the sea or streams that do not have fins or scales, whether among the swarming things or
Please, I actually want people to pray for me.
I'm sorry, what?
Can some people here pray for me, please?
Yeah, definitely.
Because I'm getting some awful thoughts.
Yeah, can you put it in the voice chat channel?
Okay.
Then I'm gonna finish up reading on Leviticus, but yes, definitely. And since you are to regard them as unclean, you must not eat their meat. You must regard their carcasses as unclean. Anything living in the water that does not have fins and scales is to be regarded as unclean by you. These are the birds you are to regard as unclean and not eat, because they are unclean: the eagle, the vulture, the black vulture, the red kite, and any kind of black kite, any kind of raven, the horned owl, the screech owl, the gull, and any kind of hawk, the little owl, the cormorant, and the great owl, the white owl, the desert owl, the osprey, the stork of any kind of heron, the hippo, and the bat. All flying insects that walk on all fours are to be regarded as unclean by you. There are, however, some flying insects that walk on all fours that you may eat, those that have jointed legs for hopping on the ground. Of these you may eat of any kind of locust, katydid, cricket, or grasshopper, but all other flying insects that have 4 legs you are to regard as unclean. You will make yourselves unclean by these. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Whoever picks up one of their carcasses must wash their clothes. They will be unclean till evening. Every animal that does not have a divided hoof or does not chew the cud is unclean for you. Whoever touches the carcass of any of them will be unclean. Of all the animals that walk on all fours, those that walk on their paws are unclean for you. Whoever touches their carcasses will be unclean till evening. Anyone who picks up their carcasses must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean until evening. These animals are unclean for you. Of the animals that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. The weasel, the rat, any kind of great lizard, the gecko, the monitor lizard, the wall lizard, the skink, and the chameleon. Of all those that move along the ground, these are unclean for you. Whoever touches them when they are dead will be unclean till evening. When one of them dies and falls on something, that article, whatever its use, will be unclean, whether it's made of wood, cloth, hide, or sackcloth. Put it in water, it will be unclean till evening, and then it will be clean. If one of them falls in a clay pot, everything in it will be unclean, and you must break the pot. Any food you are allowed to eat that has come in contact with water from any such pot is unclean, and any liquid that is drunk from such a pot is unclean. Anything that one of the carcasses falls on becomes unclean. An oven or cooking pot must be broken up. They are unclean, and you are to regard them as unclean. A spring, however, or a cistern for collecting water remains unclean. But anyone who touches one of these carcasses is unclean. If a carcass falls on any seed that are to be planted, they remain clean. But if water has been put on the seed and a carcass falls on it, it is unclean for you. If an animal that you are allowed to eat dies, anyone who touches its carcass will be unclean till evening. Anyone who eats some of its carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean until evening. Anyone who picks up the carcass must wash their clothes, and they will be unclean till evening. Every creature that moves along the ground is to be regarded as unclean. It is not to be eaten. You are not to eat of any creature that moves along the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all fours or on many feet. It is unclean. Do not defile yourselves by any of these creatures. Do not make yourselves unclean by means of them, or be made unclean by them. I am the Lord your God. Consecrate yourselves and be holy, because I am holy. Do not make yourselves unclean by any creature that moves along the ground. I am the Lord who brought you up out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy, because I am holy. These are the regulations concerning animals, birds, and every living thing that moves about in the water, and every creature that moves along the ground. You must distinguish between the unclean and the clean, between the living creatures that may be eaten and those that may not be eaten. Oh, that was 11. So, yeah, what's with the whole until evening thing? Naz, do you want to take it away, and then I'll fill in any extra gaps that I found? I'm sure that yours is probably a little bit more comprehensive.
So, okay, we've been given the instructions now to dealing with food. And so we get this combination of Hebrew words for touch and eat. And we only see this other combination in two other places. And one of those places is in Genesis chapter 3, and the other place is in Deuteronomy chapter 14, verse 8, which also deals with the food laws. So we get this combination of touch and eat. And again, this may be another allusion to what we're seeing in Genesis 3 with the serpent and the woman, because the woman says, "We shall not touch or eat from the tree." And so, what some scholarships say is that the food laws are being built off of the narrative of Genesis chapter 3. We also get the rare word for belly employed. That you only really find in Genesis chapter 3 and Leviticus chapter 11. So again, that's another link word between the two narratives. And so this is really going to bridge things together. And so this forms another, part of a set of parallels between Leviticus and Genesis. So in the next chapter of Leviticus, which we're not going to read, you get the idea of childbirth. And in the narrative of Genesis chapter 3, Eve is cursed with painful childbirth. In Leviticus chapter 13 and 14, you get the idea of a leper who's then going to be exiled from the community. And this is going to parallel Adam and Eve being cast out of the Garden of Eden. And so at different points, in kind of like in a sequence, Leviticus is picking up on themes that we see in Genesis. So this can account for, why do we have all of this instruction? What is it responding to? Well, it's responding to specific issues within Genesis. And as you go on through Leviticus, again, you're going to identify other issues that pop up in Genesis that are going to be dealt with in Leviticus. And so basically the commandments are in response to what we see in Genesis. And so this constitutes some of the parallels that some scholarship see in this area. But those are my comments.
Okay. So I've got some of the things that are shared a lot with the Genesis 1 through 3, where we've got both of them have in Genesis 1 or Genesis 2, I believe, you have the different spheres of existence. You have land, water, air, and 4 classifications of creatures that are mentioned, being the land, flying, aquatic, and swarming. And then also in Leviticus, those are the 4 classifications and the 3 different spheres, talking about what kind of animals you can eat: the land animals, the water animals, and the air animals, or the flying animals. And then classifying them down to land, flying, aquatic, and swarming. And then also that same Eden imagery, where in Leviticus 26, showing Canaan as imagery of a new Eden, where humanity and God co-inhabit. And Leviticus is portraying that imagery of being on the way to re-enter Eden, which is similar to what we've seen in the previous couple chapters as well. And in Eden, we have positive commands regarding eating, and then it's accompanied by a dietary restriction as well. So here's something you can eat, here's something you cannot eat. Very similar to Eden, where it's here's the things you can eat, here's the thing that you can't eat. And then the disobedience of Eden's dietary law banished someone out of the presence of God, or out of Eden. Likewise, when someone transgresses the dietary law, that person is made unclean until evening. Now, as a note as to unclean till evening, it is a temporary banishment, but it's from God's presence, since that was the temple. So they were not allowed to be in the temple if they were considered unclean. So breaking the dietary law broke you away from God's presence, in a sense, which was similar to Eden. Breaking that dietary law, eating from the tree, you are banished from God's presence. There's also some of the serpent imagery, which was noted in Naz, the article that you sent me as well, which was that the creatures, you're not to eat of any of the creature that moves along the ground, whether it moves on its belly or walks on all 4. That moves on its belly is the same kind of that same phrase that we see in Genesis 3, saying to the serpent, because you have done this, you're cursed above all cattle, every beast of the field, and on your belly you will move. So this thing that is being basically like an abomination is something that we should not eat, and it's the move on its belly paralleling. And then Leviticus 11 and Genesis 1 through 3 again with cleanliness and uncleanliness. The unclean animals, or things that are unclean, have the ability to make something clean become unclean. However, people have the ability to also make the unclean clean. And in like Leviticus 11:29 through 38, it's done through water. And many times, anytime someone is unclean or a person is unclean, that is how they are cleaned again, is through water. And so you have this uncleanliness, water, then cleanliness through the actions that we take to make it clean. But anything that is unclean can also defile something that is clean. And then the last point as to why these dietary laws, other than reflecting a lot of the stuff that's going on in Genesis, I think one of the last lines here, I am the Lord who brought you out of Egypt to be your God. Therefore be holy because I am holy. I'd say that's probably for me, that's like the best reasoning as to why we don't eat these things. There are certain things that we sacrifice to God, and these are the things that God consumes with fire. And likewise, these are things that would be safe for us to consume. because what is good for God is good for us. If we are to be holy like God is holy, then we have the same diet in essence as God. Other reasons why people have mentioned this, and I think it's in Philo talks about it, Josephus talks about it, Maimonides, Dees or whatever. I keep messing up his name. He comments on it. A lot of the rabbis comment on it. Everything from it's a health reason. These are why these animals are okay to eat and not eat, because of later on we find out, tapeworms and different diseases and viruses. But then that raises the question, why are plants not mentioned here? Or why is like certain types of water not mentioned? Why is it only animals? And there's not like any kind of dietary restrictions around plants throughout the entire Bible. And so the other one is that it was just to separate us as a people. And one of the other popular viewpoints, had to deal with I think this is one that I can't remember his name. But it was that like some of the meats are delicious, such as pig is delicious, according to this one rabbi. But that is
Wait,
why
how
we're
would you know?
right. But he says that it was basically, or as a philosopher maybe, but pig is delicious, and that's why they were to abstain from it, because it was basically like as almost like a punishment or a way of saying not all things you can have, even though they're all good for you, just to limit what kind of desires that you have. And so it's more to practice self-control, and that was the whole purpose of it. So yeah, a lot of different opinions on it, but obviously it's in there.
Well, one thing I would say is, generally speaking, that the animals that you can eat in the Torah there are domesticated. So they're not like wild animals that could harm you. Generally speaking, obviously, like cows can herd and you can get trampled to death and things like this. But generally speaking, they were domesticated. So, is there a little indication there? Because obviously, these animals would have been slaughtered for like offerings and things like this. And so, is this really a picture of the priesthood having dominion over all creation? Right? They don't have to fight the animals to death, right? A lot of the domesticated animals are going to be placid when they come and be slaughtered, and so there could be some kind of indication there that they are fulfilling the mandate that was given to Adam, and they're ruling over the new creation as they work in the temple, as the temple is associated with all creation. And so within that kind of worldview, maybe the animals there, the domesticated animals there, would be a lot more easier to slay, and so that means dominion that they have. So that's a possible, in my view, anyway, that's a possible interpretation as to why it's domesticated animals and not wild animals you're allowed to eat.
I like that view as well.
Well, Dean, can you not do that? Thank you.
Good. Any other comments, questions? Anyone have another why reason towards dietary, as far as why they might have been implemented, or anything
Because
else?
pig is Satan's meat.
Pig is Satan's meat. Don't eat Satan's meat.
I could be completely wrong on this, but I was talking to my mom about this. Wasn't there something that like we don't have to do that anymore because of like Jesus dying for us or something? We don't have to follow the law like that.
It's complicated.
Okay. Okay, right. Never mind that.
Yeah.
To say the least, it's complicated.
Yeah, we can.
But yes, to answer your question, yes. But
Okay. We can go with
there's
it
a lot more
another time.
details about why it's not so clear cut of yes and no. But overall, yes.
Okay. Yeah, we can do it. Like I guess right after this study, we can get into all of that because it's a good conversation. It's fun. We have it so often. Okay, 2 Samuel 6:1 through 7:17 is the next part. Here we go. David again brought together all of the able young men of Israel, 30,000. He and all of his men went to Bela in Judah to bring up from there the ark of God, which is called by the name of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim on the ark. They set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it from the house of Abinadab, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, were guiding the new cart with the ark of God on it, and Ahio was walking in front of it. David and all of Israel were celebrating with all their might before the Lord, with castanets, harps, lyres, timbrels, sistrums, and cymbals. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark of God because the oxen stumbled. The Lord's anger burned against Uzzah because of his irreverent act. Therefore God struck him down, and he died there beside the ark of God. Then David was angry because the Lord's wrath had broken out against Uzzah, and to this day that place is called Perez Uzzah. David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "How can the ark of the Lord ever come to me?" He was not willing to take the ark of the Lord to be with him in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed him and his entire household. Now King David was told, "The Lord has blessed the household of Obed-Edom and everything he has because of the ark of God." So David went to bring up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. When those who were carrying the ark of the Lord had taken 6 steps, he sacrificed a bull and a fattened calf. Wearing a linen ephod, David was dancing before the Lord with all of his might. And while he and all of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sounds of trumpets, as the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Michal, daughter of Saul, watched from a window. And when she saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, she despised him in her heart. They brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. And David sacrificed burnt offerings and fellowship offerings before the Lord. He had finished sacrificing the burnt offerings and fellowship offerings, and he had blessed the people in the name of the Lord Almighty. Then he gave a loaf of bread, a cake of dates, and a cake of raisins to each person in the crowd of Israelites, both men and women, and all the people went into their homes. When David returned home to bless his household, Michal, daughter of Saul, came out to meet him and said, "How the king of Israel has distinguished himself today, going around half naked in full view of the slave girls of his young servants, as any vulgar fellow would." David said to her, "It was before the Lord, who chose me rather than your father or anyone from his house when he appointed me ruler of the Lord's people of Israel. I will celebrate before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this, and I will be humiliated in my own eyes. But by these slave girls you spoke of, I will be held in honor." And Michal, daughter of Saul, had no children to the day of her death. After the king was settled in his place, do you want me to stop there for a second, Naz?
Yeah, go
Since
for
we're
it.
going into that next part, because I feel like there's going to be some questions.
So there we go. So we got David there, and he's accompanying the ark, but he's acting in a very priestly way. So even though he's not called a priest, he does demonstrate certain aspects of being a priest. You got the idea of sacrifice that is associated with. He wears the ephod. You see that in verse 13 and 14. He pitches the sacred tent. You see that in verse 17. He blesses the people, verse 18, and distributes bread to the people, verse 19. So basically, you got David here, but he's being presented in a kingly stroke priestly context. And so we do have precedent within the Torah for such a thing. We've got Melchizedek. We also have texts like Psalms 110, where again it speaks of Melchizedek. And so you've also got this kind of curious comment about David's sons, their Kohanim. that they're priests. And so you do have this kind of priestly association with King David. And so again, this could set the precedent for a king priest. And certainly you do get that indication in the Gospels and the epistles that the Messiah is both king and priest. But ultimately, that's going to track back to Adam, because Adam was supposed to have rulership over the entire earth. That would make him a king. And he also had proximity to the Most High. He had closeness to the Most High, and that would give you your priestly aspect. And so there are priestly terminology that's used with Adam. He's to serve and keep the garden. And these two Hebrew words are employed later on in the Torah with the priesthood. So you do have these kind of indications that Adam has these combined roles. And you see these combined roles in Melchizedek as well in Genesis chapter 14. And then that imagery is later picked up with David here as well. So you got this kind of kingly priestly thread now that's kind of throughout the scriptures. But those are my comments for now.
I think in that first part where reaches out to stop the ark from tipping and potentially falling on the ground, I know that they were carrying it in an improper way because they put it on a cart instead of carrying it as the command was, which is why that was bad. However, in his position, I think I would be dead as well because I would have seen it tipping, and even on both reactions, I'd be thinking, one, I know I'm not supposed to touch it, but would God be more upset that I touched it, or that it was essentially treated with disrespect by hitting the ground? And I think I also would have just reached out there and tried to keep it from touching the ground, and seeing that as a greater honor, even though it's defying God's commands like right away. But yeah,
it is a curious account.
Yeah, I don't know if anyone would do any different. But
I let it drop.
you would let it drop?
I'd probably just watch it fall and just stand there just staring at it like, oh boy.
I would have
now.
just put something over my hand so I don't touch it and caught it.
Yeah, it might have
that much time.
It probably, actually, more realistically, if I wasn't right next to it, it would have been like a car crash situation where you're just looking at it and you're just frozen. You're like, ooh, ooh, and then that's it, and then you watch it fall.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Okay. So I'm not alone on that. That's cool. Okay, 2 Samuel 7, 1 through 17. After the king was settled in his palace and the Lord had given him rest from all of his enemies around him, he said to Nathan the prophet, "Here I am, living in the house of cedar, while the ark of God remains in a tent." Nathan replied to the king, "Whatever you have in mind, go ahead and do it, for the Lord is with you." But that night the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and tell my servant David, this is what the Lord says. Are you the one to build me a house to dwell in? I have not dwelled in a house from the day I brought the Israelites up out of Egypt to this day. I've been moving from place to place with my tent as my dwelling. Wherever I have moved with all my Israelites, did I ever say to any of their rulers whom I commanded to shepherd my people of Israel, 'Why have you not built me a house of cedar?' Now then, tell my servant David, this is what the Lord Almighty says. I took you from the pasture, from tending the flock, and appointed you ruler over my people. I have been with you wherever you have gone, and I have cut off all of your enemies before you. Now I will make your name great, like the names of the greatest men on earth. And I will provide a place for my people of Israel, and I will plant them so that they can have a home of their own and no longer be disturbed. Wicked people will not oppress them anymore as they did at the beginning. And I have done ever since the time I appointed leaders over my people of Israel. I will also give you rest from all of your enemies. The Lord declares to you that the Lord himself will establish a house for you. When your days are over and you rest with your ancestors, I will raise up your offspring to succeed you, your own flesh and blood, and I will establish his kingdom. He is the one who will build a house for my name, and I will establish the throne of his kingdom forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. When he does wrong, I will punish him with a rod wielded by men, with floggings inflicted by human hands. But my love will never be taken away from him, as I took it away from Saul, whom I removed from before you. Your house and your kingdom will endure forever before me. Your throne will be established forever. Nathan reported to David all the words of this entire revelation. And that would be the end of 2 Samuel. Any questions, comments, insults?
Okay. So sometimes when we're thinking about the Davidic promises, the promises to David, sometimes the promises are extended to those who accept the gospel. And I'm going to point you to one example of this. So the next verse, which I'm going to read out, is actually an allusion to 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 8 and 14. And so it's within a kind of collection of different verses that the Apostle Paul uses. But in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, we get this: "And I will be a father to you, and you will be sons and daughters to me, says the Lord Almighty." So this father language, "and I will be father to you, and you will be sons," is taken from the promise to David that we've just seen. And so what's happening is the Apostle Paul there is he's extending the promises that were given to David and to his sons, and he's extending them onto those who accept the gospel. But this happens elsewhere as well. This also happens in Revelation. So another example is in Revelation chapter 2. So what I'll do, I will read chapter 2 out, and hopefully what you'll see is, again, the promises are extended from a Davidic kind of context to those who accept the gospel. Here we go. This is Revelation chapter 2, verse 26 and 27. "And the one overcoming and the one keeping my works until the end, I will give to him authority over the nations, and he will shepherd them with an iron staff, and they are broken to pieces like clay vessels, as I also have received from my Father." So this is a citation of Psalms chapter 2, verse 8 and 9. And in Psalms chapter 2, 8 and 9, the Davidic king is promised dominion over the nations. And so this psalm is not only applied to the Messiah, but it's actually applied to those who accept the gospel. So just like we've got the example in Corinthians, 2 Corinthians, where the promise is extended to those who accept the gospel, the same principle is used in Revelation. And so basically now you're participating in the idea of being a son of David. You are participating in those promises. And because of that, as Revelation says, you're going to rule with the Messiah. You're going to participate in that rule. And so really, what's all this about? Why are we ruling with the Messiah? Well, the Messiah there, it goes back to Adam. Adam was to have dominion over the entire earth. And so basically one of the roles of the Messiah is to elevate mankind to be where they should be, what the Most High originally intended with mankind. And so when you now participate in the rule of the Messiah, you're participating in the rule that Adam should have had. And so basically it's restoring what mankind had in the very beginning, but it's using the Davidic promises to bring about that restoration and that dominion. So those are my comments.
Cool. It's interesting talking about the future event being, "I will be a father to him, he shall be a son," but when he commits iniquities or when he sins or transgresses, I will discipline him with the rod of men, with this or with flogging. But then also we see, like, even in the New Testament, where this seems to be something that is also a present and also future thing as well, such as like in Revelation, it's saying like, "I reprove, I discipline, so be zealous and repent." In 1 Corinthians, it's saying, when we are judged by the Lord, we are disciplined so that we are not condemned along with the rest of the world. Which is just kind of like, yes, he's a father, we are the sonship, but there is still disciplining, but it's so that we aren't condemned with the rest of the world. Not to say that there is no more discipline now that now that Jesus has died. It's like, oh, that's all discipline is gone now. So yeah, just interesting notes.
Yeah, when it comes to the building of the temple, right? You got this narrative where David is going to end up giving the plans to Solomon, and then Solomon builds the temple. So again, it's going to be another a replay of creation, right? There are texts in like Psalms and elsewhere where the Most High creates all of creation through His wisdom, and you're going to see Solomon, and he's going to be filled with wisdom, and then he's going to build the temple, and the building of the temple is going to take 7 years. And so again, it brings you back to the idea of temple building and 7. And so you got the 7, 6+1 structure in Genesis chapter 1. And so again, Genesis 1 is really connotating a temple being built. All of creation acts as a temple. And so these types of ideas are reflected in the tabernacle. As we've seen, the tabernacle is divided into 7 speeches to construct the tabernacle in Exodus chapter 25 to 31. And so you got this idea of 7 then being associated with Solomon's temple. It's built in 7 years. And again, in the context of Solomon will be the new Adam in the restored, renewed temple. And so again, you've got Edenic type imagery below the surface as well. So again, it's continuing on the narrative of trying to set up this new Adam, but sin gets in the way, and the picture gets marred, and so this opens the door for a last Adam to step in and complete the picture. So those are my comments.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, observations, or just oddities? It's an open floor. Dean, you've got a question, right? All right, good chat, Dean.
I got an insult.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
Whenever you read, you stutter, and it bothers me.
Oh, okay. I'll work on that. Sorry for making you
Wow.
stumble in your faith, Yellow.
It's fine. I mean, I'm kidding.
All right, cool. All right, Matthew 3:11 through 17. I baptize you with water for repentance, but after me comes one who is more powerful than I, whose sandals I am not worthy to carry. He will baptize you with the Holy Spirit and fire. His winnowing fork is in his hand, and he will clear his threshing floor, gathering his wheat into the barn and burning up the chaff with unquenchable fire. Then Jesus came from Galilee to the Jordan to be baptized by John. But John tried to deter him, saying, I need to be baptized by you, and do you come to me? Jesus replied, Let it be so now. It is proper for us to do this to fulfill all righteousness. And then John consented. As soon as Jesus was baptized, he went up out of the water. At that moment, heaven was open. He saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting on him. And a voice from heaven said, This is my Son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. And that is the end of Matthew. Opening it up again so that Yellow can insult me and anyone else with comments, questions.
Nice.
I do think Well,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to chime in first. All right, Yellow?
Go for it. It's all you.
So what's interesting is that this is also talking about the baptism, but going back into the making things clean, like the unclean clean, and being able to do that. I think that just the water analogies that you see from Genesis and Leviticus, as far as being cleansed and being able to be presented before the Lord properly, And then we still have this same concept where as soon as he comes out of the water, as soon as this cleansing happens, this is when the Spirit of God descends on him, and you have this voice, like the presence of God is clearly with him. This is my son whom I love and I'm well pleased. Just very, very reflective of Leviticus and Genesis.
So you got this language of beloved. When he comes up from the waters, he's called beloved. And so this type of language would bring to mind the story of Abraham and Isaac, because Isaac is the beloved son. But there's also another beloved son, and that's Solomon. Solomon was called beloved as well. And so in the Gospel of Matthew, it seems to be fusing together the ideas of both sons. And you can see this in the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 1, because it talks about the Messiah in terms of the son of David, the son of Abraham. And obviously the son of David is the most famous one is Solomon. And the son of Abraham is Isaac. And what links them both together is that they're both called beloved. And so now he's called the beloved son when he arises up out of the water. And when it comes to immersion, you've got two sides. One is death and one is life. One is birth. So you've got this kind of death and birth context in when you're being immersed. And as he came out of the water, he was called Isaac, basically the beloved, a term for Isaac. And so this is going to set up the narrative now for the Gospels. And so when you get to the end, his resurrection is going to parallel a birth scene, and the sum total of that is that Zion, Jerusalem, was tied together with the imagery of Sarah. So Sarah was the barren woman who brought forth Isaac, and Zion, Jerusalem, was associated in the prophets with Sarah. The Apostle Paul also does this in Galatians chapter 4, where he links Jerusalem and Sarah together. And so you've got this kind of barren imagery that's associated with Zion in, for instance, Isaiah 54, which is also employed in Galatians chapter 4. So his resurrection then would act as a birth, and it would act as Zion, Jerusalem, giving birth to the promised child, akin to Sarah giving birth to Isaac. And so you've also got this kind of Isaac imagery also associated with those who accept the gospel in Galatians chapter 4. And so all of this kind of imagery is kind of merging together in the Messiah. And so the idea of the resurrection is responding to ideas of Zion giving birth, as she was prophesied to do in the prophets. You can see this expectation in Isaiah 54, in Isaiah 66, and elsewhere. And so when you read the Gospels now in that kind of way, that you're linking it to the story of Abraham and Sarah, you've got the imagery of Isaac there as well. So those are my comments.
Cool. I need to add some of that to the study portion, or the study guide, but I will do that. All right. Any other comments, questions, anything before we close this out, and then we'll get into the dietary. Does it apply? That kind of thing.
Sick.
Okay. All right. Well, that concludes the portion study today. Feel free to stick around, ask questions, fellowship. We might do a game or two. We've got Geo something. It's pretty fun. And we'll catch everyone else next week. If you're on Twitch, once again, just type Discord in chat. Yeah, GeoGuessr, that's the one. Just type Discord somewhere in chat. You'll get a link to the Discord channels, so you can have a voice conversation, ongoing Bible studies throughout the week. If anyone is in Discord currently and would like to help us improve these, just head over to the announcements channel. There's a thing called the Parashah Survey. If you want to fill that out, we can make these better and better. So that yellow insults me less. And Naz, singing the outro music yet, or no?
Yes, do it!
No.
Okay, all right. So that's the end of that. All right. Well, that being said, I guess we can move on to the next